Well, we have a great group today and a really great session ahead. So welcome to the Tory Burch Foundation Small Business Webinar Series. Today's session is just the ultimate co-founder clinic. And I am Molly Heffernan, Director of Marketing for the Tory Burch Foundation. And I am just so thrilled to be here with Alisa. Alisa Cohn is an executive coach who has worked with C-suite leaders at startups, big brands, a few places you all might recognize like Venmo, Etsy, Tory Burch, Fortune 500 company execs at places like Google, Pfizer, Calvin Klein. I mean, these are some incredible companies. She's also the author of From Start Up to Grown Up and hosts a really great podcast by the very same name. Startup to Grown Up provides insights, tools for the journey founders and leaders go through as they scale their leadership. I think something that a lot of us think about. Alisa is also an executive coach for Runway, an incubator at Cornell's New York City campus. So needless to say, we are in great hands today. And Alisa is going to talk to us all about co-founder partnerships, tips for really making your business relationships strong and navigating those with confidence. So after Alisa's presentation, we're going to have time for Q&A. So make sure that you are using the Q&A box for your questions. We don't want to miss them. And then use the chat for all that fun community building and connecting with everybody on today's session. And then one last note, you see the red button in the top corner. We are recording today's session and you will have access to a link to rewatch later. So if you miss something, it is okay. And this is available and here for you later. So with that, I think everyone's had enough of me and I'd like to pass it over to Alisa to take it away.
Thank you so much, Molly. Thanks for that great introduction. And thanks to Tory Burch Foundation for convening this incredible group. I'm so excited to be speaking with you today. I'm just going to share my screen as we get started. And to really talk about all things co-founders. So as Molly said, I wrote a book. It's called From Startup to Grown Up. And it is about the journey from founder to leader. And the truth is, it's about the journey that all leaders have to go with. And part of that journey has to do with dealing effectively with your key business relationships. We're going to focus that discussion on co-founders today, because that's, really the heart of the matter in Co-Founder Clinic. But I want all of you to think about this from the point of view of nourishing the key relationships that you have with all your stakeholders, all your really key business partners, because that's going to help you be successful. Molly talked about some of the things that I do. So as she said, I appreciate that I have worked with a number of startups in the past 22 years of coaching, including some of them you see here, as well as large public companies. So I think a lot about how do I help small organizations get more systematic and focused on process and tools that they need to grow into large thriving organizations, and how do I bring more of an entrepreneurial mindset into large companies. So, you might want to think about that also for yourselves. And I also write for Harvard Business Review pretty regularly. In fact, I wrote an article about how to nourish your co-founder relationships, as well as Inc. and Forbes. So, and then I should just add, I also appreciate, Molly, you brought up my podcast, also called From Startup to Grown Up. I want to share that with you because it's a free resource. You can just go and listen. And we've been talking about so many things in my 30 episodes, interviewing founders, successful founders, about their tips, tools, and practices to grow their businesses and also grow themselves. So I offer that to you as a free resource. But today we're going to talk about, co-founders. And co-founders, if you think about that as both your co-founders and all your close business partnerships. And I want to start by just offering this question, like, why is this important, right? I mean, the fact is that you're growing your business. You have a lot of things you're worried about. So why should we focus just on this co-founder relationship? And I'll tell you why. It's because research from Noam Wasserman, who is really in some ways the guru of research as it relates to why startups fail, has identified that 65% of high potential small businesses and startups fail because of co-founder conflict. 65%. I think that's pretty, impressive by way of how important it is to have this co-founder relationship working. And again, if he talks about that more broadly, he really thinks about not just the co-founder relationship, but the founding team. So early connections, early team, early sort of partnership, and then early vendors and key suppliers and people around you. So it is a very pivotal relationship. Also, I would add that when you are not working well with your co-founder, or when things are not great between really important key stakeholders of yours, truth is that it causes you a lot of stress and tension at work. When you're a startup founder, when you're a small business owner, you have enough stress and tension at work. And so you don't need extra with this sort of angst of being at odds with your co-founder. So that's why we're going to talk about this today. And we're going to really talk about essential tools for you with your co-founder relationship. And I guess I want to say that sometimes people will say, well, if it's so difficult having a co-founder, in my book, I actually say, when you have a co-founder, you have a marriage. And it's either a good marriage or a bad marriage. And plenty of people have had bad co-founder marriages. And also, people will say to me regularly, well, if it's so difficult, why should I found with somebody else? Why should I? Because it's like maybe easier to do it myself. That might be true. But there are benefits as well to the co-founder relationship. Basically, if you have a co-founder, you have a marriage. And if it's a good marriage, you're able to really deal with the ups and downs in the business. And there are many of them with a partner. What you have is you have somebody who's working side by side, sometimes the only person you can confide in, and the person who really understands the downs and can celebrate the ups. I would add, I spoke to Michelle Romanow, who is one of the co-founders of Clearbank in Toronto, and it is a very successful unicorn company. And she once told me that, when she sees her co-founder at work, like on email or whatever, she doesn't know what he's doing, but what she knows is that he's doing something that she doesn't have to worry about. So you have this idea that you have someone who cares as much as you do, working as hard as you do in the business. So it can be really worth it if you have these essential tools that you need to know about to nourish your co-founder relationships. So let's get started, talk about what are those tools. The first is, it always starts with you. I'm an executive coach. I focus a lot on so many aspects of growing a business, but it always comes back to starting with you. You have to identify what makes you tick. What is important to you? When you get into business with somebody else, you're going to want to have a lot of conversations with that person, but until you've clarified your own values and what you're about, you're not really going to be able to have productive conversations with that person. So I want to implore everybody to spend time in the weeks and months to come to really get a handle on you and what you want. It's really helpful to journal about kind of your hopes and dreams for the business, your actual sort of vision for what's going to happen when it gets successful, the values that are important to you and when you run your business, the culture you want to create. If you're a solopreneur, you're creating a certain kind of culture. If you're building a larger entity, you're creating a different kind, also your own unique culture. And so you really want to think for yourself and explore in mind what makes you tick. So again, it's helpful to journal about these questions for yourself. It's also helpful to talk to a friend or a colleague who's not necessarily your co-founder so that you can really explore and clarify what's important to you. I also advise all my clients to write down during the day and kind of journal during the day what is energizing them and what is de-energizing them. You can write on your calendar like 2 or 3 times a day prompts for yourself to answer some of these questions. What has energized me the most today? What has de-energized or drained me today? What have I really gotten delight from today? And what has given me stress? What do I need to kind of do more of and do less of to continue to work in my zone of genius in the business? Those are some questions you can ask yourself. You can ask other questions of yourself. But when you really do the work of getting kind of macro, like what am I trying to drive in my business? What does my business look like when it's reaching its pinnacle? And then also the micro, like what do I like and not like? That's going to help you have a conversation that you need to with your close business relationships, and certainly with your co-founder. So just kind of clarifying for yourself what makes you tick, what your values are. And then that leads you to your ability to do the work that I think is important to do, which is, I call it a co-founder prenup. It's not really a prenup. It's not really like a legal document. In fact, it's not a legal document, but it's the basis for a set of conversations that it's super important for you to have with your co-founder early and often. The early part has to do with your forming a business. To me, it's just always incredible how people kind of jump into business with somebody else without knowing them that well, without knowing what's in their mind's eye, and without knowing kind of if they're on the same page together. I think that is a shame. So I want to offer you this co-founder prenup to help you catalyze the right conversations and the right questions to ask each other. So you can see some of these questions here. It's really helpful to exchange ideas on what is our vision for the business? What culture do we want to build? The question of how hard do you want to work? Some people want a lifestyle business. Some people really want to build a thriving enterprise, and they're willing to put a lot of time in. And that disparity can bring a lot of conflict. And then, of course, how can you handle conflict? So I'll give you some examples of where this has gone wrong in my experience. I once was working with two co-founders, and they were about 6 years into the business. And every time I met with them, with one of them, sort of individually, both of them individually, one of them would talk about the business they want to build, and they took venture capital money, and they wanted to build a big enterprise, and they wanted it to be, massive and successful and take over the world and ultimately be a so-called unicorn, billion-dollar business. The other co-founder, his point of view was, I remember the days when we were small. I wish we could go back to the point where we were small, where we were knew everybody and we knew what everybody was doing. And I kept trying to help them talk about this together, because fundamentally they had never, ever, ever, in the beginning days, in the middle, and then here 6 years in, they had never talked about the actual vision of the business they wanted to build. And it was causing massive consternation, because one of them kept making decisions that were focused on keeping the business small and tight and friendly. And the other one kept making decisions to keep the business growing and thriving. So, by the way, neither of those are wrong. They're both great, but they're very different. So clarifying your vision in advance is so important. And I'll share with you another story of two founders who did the work of this. Two founders I work with even now, they actually spent their first 2 years in one of their parents' bedrooms or something, working together, talking about two things. They were, of course, figuring out the business and coding and doing all those things, but they were focused on two things. One was, what kind of company do I want to be a part of? If I woke up every day and wanted to go into this company, what would I love about it? What would the culture look like? What would I look forward to every day? And they had some disagreements, and they got on the same page by virtue of working together every day and discussing intensely these kinds of questions. And the second was, what vision do we looking for the company? Do we want to kind of grow slowly? Do we want to stay small? Do we want to get big? Do we want to take venture money? If so, how much money? When I met them, and they were kind of 5 years into the journey when I met them, I asked them questions about, have you discussed this? And with no preparation, one of the co-founders looked at the other and said, you want to sell? And the other one said, no, never, because they had a certain journey they wanted to go on, and that was an IPO, and that's what they wanted to do. And they had obviously talked about that. So I want to give that to you, because I really want to ask you to think about how you're going to bring up, no matter where you are in the life cycle of your business, how are you going to bring up the right conversations that you need to have? And I want to especially emphasize that last one about how do you handle conflict. Everyone has a different model for handling conflict. Everybody, grew up in a certain way, in home where conflict was either discussed or not discussed. Yelling happened, yelling didn't happen. but one way or the other, you were imprinted with that. When you get dropped into this relationship with your partner, suddenly those areas come up all the time, and you don't unpack the way you naturally handle conflict. So having a conversation about that be really helpful. And I'll talk in a little bit about another tool to use to handle conflict. The next tool is super important for everybody in your company. Doesn't happen enough in all companies, as I sort of see in my 22 years of experience, but it's especially important with co-founders to clarify your roles, to clarify what you're doing and what your partner is doing. The reason that's so important is because when you don't clarify your roles, right, you kind of step on each other's toes without even realizing it, without meaning to. You also don't trust that someone else is handling something unless you've actually decided you're going to handle this, I'm going to handle that. Now, early days of the company, when there were just 2 of you, or there's a founding team, there's just 10 of you, honestly, doesn't matter so much because everyone's doing everything. And also it's easy to communicate when there are 10 people in a room together. You just kind of shout over the other person. Where this becomes a real issue is when you start scaling. A lot of you are hoping to build big businesses. And if you don't start with clarifying your roles, what happens is things get bigger. You can no longer just shout to the person over there about what you're doing. And then suddenly you're not sure who's taking care of what. So you're either stepping on each other's toes or you're letting things fall through the cracks. Now, the problem with that is it causes co-founder tension. And the problem with that is that all the employees around you are watching this co-founder tension. They also don't know where to go to get answers to their questions. So as things grow in particular, it's really helpful to come together and figure out, okay, let's regroup. Here's the areas I'm working on. Here are the areas that I'm working on. Now, in some businesses, both founders have a really strong feeling about what they want to build. We call it the product, whether it's a tech product, whether it's a real estate product, whether it's a fashion product, whatever it is, they may both have really strong opinions. And they both cannot be in charge of the product itself. So you have to decide who's going to let go of that area and who's going to take it on and make sure they get the input of the other founder. So those are some of the pitfalls to look for as you begin to sort of tease out and get really clear on your roles. I have a lot more to say about that if you guys want to ask questions about that. But coming back to conflict, the best way to really sort of nail being able to have productive conflict together, because conflict is normal in any relationship. You have to be able to talk things through as you need to and come to good decisions. The best way to do that is to practice having conflict. I like to tell my founders to actually have conflict meetings. So maybe once a month on a Tuesday, you go out for dinner, you out for drinks, or you just sit in the office, whatever it is, and you bring up anything on your mind that might be conflict. You actually mine for conflict. Now, just like in a marriage, when you're early days as a co-founder and you're excited about building a business and you're kind of excited with this new adrenaline, you may not have any conflict. It's like the honeymoon period. So if you don't have any conflict, it can be hard to even imagine the day we will disagree. I promise you that day is coming. So that's why it's so essential to actually bring up things that are a little bit bothering you, or bring up things which are concerns of yours in the business, because that gets you used to having the discussions that are not so pretty, they're not so optimistic, and also you will stumble into conflict in doing that. When you do that, when the stakes are low, and get in the habit of doing that, and then debriefing how you each handle conflict, how you did it as a child, how your family deals with conflict, you're going to be able to deal with the issues that really matter when conflict shows up. So one person I talked to on my podcast, his name is Paul English. He's the co-founder of Kayak, which was sold to Priceline for about, $2.1 billion. And he's an 8-time entrepreneur. And what he said to me was when he founded Kayak, he and Steve Hafner, that's his co-founder, their one agreement was they were going to have to be super direct with each other. Now, that was not so easy for one of them, but the other one insisted, Paul actually insisted, that's the way we need to operate ourselves. And because they talked about it and then actually had practice meetings about it, when issues arose, which they did in their journey of building Kayak, they were able to figure out how to continue to talk and be in dialogue, even if they weren't, even if they didn't agree, which they didn't often. And I should add that what Paul talked about was the way they disagreed was that if somebody had a strong point of view, the other co-founder would always take into account. So it's kind of a decision rule they made about if they disagreed. So it might be that it was Steve's area, but Paul had a very strong opinion. They agreed in advance that Steve would take into account and overly weight Paul's opinion if he felt strongly about it. Now, you can't abuse that you can't feel strongly about everything, but that's one way to think about how do you kind of alleviate the concerns of the other co-founder when you inevitably have issues and disagree. I also recommend for co-founders to have what I call date night. So I call it date night kind of tongue in cheek, but now all the clients I work with also call it date night. And here's why. Building a startup is stressful. Building a small business into whatever it is, the world of business when you're the owner is very stressful. It's intense. It's an extreme work environment. You have ups and you have downs on a daily basis, sometimes in a 5-minute basis. When one of my clients, we were in a meeting, and in the middle of the meeting, he got an email that said they got their biggest customer ever. Yay! And then sadly, 5 minutes later, he got an email that his key employee had given notice to resign. Depressing. What's he going to do to fill that? So the point is that these extreme moments happen all the time. And if you're just dealing with your co-founder in the business, if you're just dealing with your co-founder in terms of how do you have conflict, you're not continuing to invest in the relationship that's going to help you grease the wheels of working together. So you've got to find unstructured time together. One of the founders of Task Us, which is an enormously successful, again, unicorn company, he told me that the reason their co-founder relationship was so successful is because they each put the needs of each other, their relationship, before the business overall. So I want to encourage all of you to think about how are you building that kind of relationship with each other with informal time together, informal, formal time together. When I say informal, formal, what I mean is actually formally setting up time to have informal time together. Some of my clients have this sort of burger and brew night. They do it like once or twice a week to make sure that they're just staying together. Some of my clients, two of my clients in particular, love Broadway shows. So they go off and they see shows together. They find a way to have time together to let off steam and to also, again, build their relationship. So that is a spin through the essential tools that you need to build your co-founder relationships. And oh, by the way, they're useful for any key business relationship that you want to build. So I'm encouraging you to take, there are more tips of that in my book, which is from Startup to Grown Up. And I just want to add that you can also download 5 scripts for delicate conversations, which include delicate conversations you have with your co-founder from my website. If you'd like to, it's all right there. And I am happy, Molly, to take some questions.
Absolutely. Well, I'd love to first double back to the initial concept that you touched on, which is like, why look for a co-founder? And especially for a lot of folks on who maybe started the company without one, what are some of the benefits of bringing that co-founder in?
Totally. So despite that it's another relationship you have to manage, which it is, I would just say the benefits of having a co-founder are enormous. It's someone to share the ups and downs with. It's someone to help comfort you when you're feeling down. it's someone to have a bigger brain on some topics, like know stuff that you don't know. Plenty of co-founders are like the business co-founder and the technical co-founder. I'm working right now with an artist, very successful artist, and it's her, the artist, and her co-founder, who is the business person. So they bring massively different skills, complementary. And so when you have a co-founder, you have someone of equal weight who's a peer of yours, who's able to bring something you don't have, and also look at a situation that you're too close to with the same loyalty and trust that you have, but with a different perspective, and help you solve problems. So I think like the benefits of having a co-founder are enormous, both from like a relationship, emotional side, but also a knowledge. Oh, I should just add, they also have a different network than you have typically. So again, bringing an extensive network is a key to success for your business.
Yeah. One of the things we talk about a lot is there are so many different ways to grow your business too. And a co-founder, it sounds like from all of this, can be one of those ways to grow. Bring in somebody with other functional expertise. Maybe they're also investing capital, right? Like this is a creative way to grow as well.
Definitely. Yeah.
Now for the folks on who maybe their co-founder is a more complicated relationship.
Yeah.
So that their co-founder is a family member, maybe quite literally the person they are married to in real life. Are there other layers of managing that partnership that you would recommend people consider?
Yeah, so complicated. Thank you, Molly. Very complicated. I worked with a husband and wife co-founder, and what the husband said to me was, on the one hand, it's great. It's fantastic. There's no one he trusts more than his wife. Mm-hmm. And by the way, they get along really well. And even the people around them would say, they're super professional. If they have any issues at home, it never comes in. So like that was actually one that was working. And what he said to me was, I get anxious, but she gets more anxious. So when things are not going well at work, I can't always confide in my co-founder, who's my wife. And then when I go home, I can't always confide in my wife, who's also my co-founder. So there are those kind of dynamics as well.
Right.
That is the complexity there. However, again, I would go back to Michelle Romanow, who co-founded with her romantic partner. And she said, there is nothing like seeing your partner kill it at work. And so there's that aspect too, if it brings you closer together. Mm-hmm. I should add also, by the way, I am working with two companies, funny enough, which both have a husband and a wife and a sibling co-founder relationship. That's complicated.
Yes,
yeah,
definitely. One of the other things that a founder told us once is that they talked about the clear boundaries of like work is talked about during these hours, and now we are at family time and dinner. And I think that's harder to put into practice than anyone thinks, because think about what you talk about when you go home. You talk about work in your day.
Yeah. I love that. And Molly, I just want to say that is fabulous, having boundaries and rules, because then you know what to expect. And some people might not want that rule, because actually it's at home where they can relax and, think about the business. And if they happen to be living with their co-founder, they want to have the opportunity to be able to talk about their business. It's their third baby.
Yeah.
That's the way founders look at their companies as well. So I love that the person you're talking about set a boundary and a sort of decision rule, and everybody should think about what are the decision rules that are going to work for you.
Mm-hmm. Makes total sense.
Yeah.
Now, for folks who maybe aren't necessarily building a business with a partner, but have taken on the role of CEO or the key lead of a multi-generational family business.
Yeah.
Is there any other nuance or different tips for the multi-generational family business? Because that can also be a whole change of hands to navigate.
Yeah. Oh my God. I know we do a whole session on that. I have worked with a number of multi-generational family businesses, and as they told me in no uncertain terms, easy for you to say, Alisa, but then we have to go have Christmas dinner with them. Right? Totally true. So true. Yeah. I would just say that in that situation, you have to just be super aware of what's going on around here. What I like to do is help my clients get a strong grasp of reality. And what that means is you're in a multi-generational family, so it's a business. So it's a business, and you've got to make business decisions, and you've got this family support around you. So don't get frustrated with the family aspect, and it shouldn't be that way. It is that way.
Yeah.
And don't get sort of overly sentimental about the family because you've got a business to run. So actually, I think that the best thing that business folks can do, multi-generational family business folks can do, is to get a lot more learning and training and to be excellent at their jobs so that they can have a lot of good credibility and data surrounding what they do. And then also, one family business that I think is very smart in the sense they go to therapy together, like they do family therapy together every week. That's essential.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, there is a great question that has come in from an anonymous attendee in our Q&A box here. They are the co-founder that was brought in. So the question is, I'm a late co-founder. How do I manage disagreements when I'm dealing with a person who built the majority of the business herself?
Yeah, that's an important question. And then I would sort of say, I would kind of back up and ask a lot of questions. Like, when you came on board, did you discuss that? And if you didn't, no problem. But I think that's exactly the question you should be asking the founder, the original founder, in your new version of your co-founder prenup, because it's basically, how do we disagree and how do we have conflict is probably the essential question of a co-founder relationship. It's also the one that is least discussed, right? Because it's uncomfortable. So my advice to you is to go back and say, hey, not for nothing, right? But I'd love to just talk about how we make decisions when we disagree. I'm so excited to be part of this business. I'm so excited to be doing my thing, whatever that is. And I guess I realize that there are times that I want to bring things up, but I respect and admire that, acknowledge that you built most of this business. So what's the best way for me to weigh in? You may be surprised to learn that you were brought in order to ask difficult questions and maybe, have a different point of view, but you'll never find that out unless you're comfortable being uncomfortable asking that questions. It's back to the scripts that I told you about. I like to help people by creating scripts, and you should create your own kind of, like, I wouldn't say memorize, but you want to take notes in advance about how you want to have that delicate conversation so that you prepare to have it, and then you're able to have it, because that's essential for you in your relationship.
Yeah. And for anyone who is the co-founder on here who might be having that conversation brought to them, very important to remember to keep open in those moments when somebody is approaching you. The most dangerous thing would be to have a bunch of yes people around you.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And also, if someone is bringing to you something that's delicate and complicated for you, you get two ways of reacting. One is like, get out of here, and defensive, and how dare you? And one is like, I am feeling challenged. Tell me more, right? Because the truth is, they care enough to bring topics to you which are uncomfortable to talk through. So your best strategy is to, as you just said, Molly, so well, stay open and recognize that it's a gift that they're bringing you. Right. Otherwise, you just have people who are just not telling you the truth, and then you get what you get from that.
Yeah. Now, you've talked a lot about this unofficial prenup, but are there any hard and fast documents, whether it's NDAs or quite literally a partnership agreement, that folks should be making sure they get in place?
Great question. Yes, to a founder's agreement, very important, that establishes a lot of the rules of engagement as it relates to the kind of the legal documents. What happens if someone dies? Honestly, that does happen. What happens if the partnership dissolves? How much equity do you each get? What happens if one person wants to buy the other person out? What happens if someone wants to bring another partner on? All those things should be covered in the founder's agreement. There's no question. It's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that lends itself well into a question that was asked in the Q&A here. So in the early relationship, how do you address the elephant in the room, which is equity and finances, without straining or pushing that early relationship too far?
Yeah, it's such a good question. It's an important question. Basically, I think two things. First of all, get to know each other before you jump into building a partnership together, and get to know each other in a lot of aspects. Go out socially, find out how they operate, have conflict with this person, right? I really want to just say that, like, probably you shouldn't be starting a business with somebody that you don't already have some level of comfort having uncomfortable conversations. And then you have to talk about, as you just pointed out, equity and difficult things. There's two schools of thought on equity. One is, you've really got to think about who gets more equity compared to what they're bringing to the table and the role you're hoping they'll take on. And then another school of thought is it should be a 50-50 split of equity. So I'm not here to tell you which it should be. I definitely think you want to do more research on that. Don't take one little, 5-minute discussion in a webinar as like a way to go and do it. I think talking to a lawyer who's done it before to give you some pros and cons of that. And when you have a difficult conversation, I think it's like any business negotiation. Make sure, well, I would say, especially between, close colleagues, right? Make sure that you both know that you want the same thing in the terms of having a successful outcome for both of you. Act both of you like you want the other person to be happy. You have to be happy and they're going to be happy. I always tell my clients, when you have a partner, if they have a problem, you have a problem. So act that way. And if you can kind of keep open and compassionate and also want the end result to be fair, then you'll do a better job with that. One of the clients I worked with was a more junior, let's say junior co-founder with less equity. And as we dealt together, he never got over it. He never got over the small amount of equity that he got when he thought he should have gotten more. And there were all these reasons and a third partner and the whole thing. And I will just say that if you think that you won because you got so much more equity, you won the short game, but you may not have won the long game.
Right. There is the human end of it all in the long view to think about.
Yes, totally.
So there, on the other end, when you have a co-founder, but maybe things are not working out, what are some signs and signals that it might be time to part ways?
Yeah, I think that the first thing you need to do is try to save the partnership, because listen, it's stressful. Business is stressful. Building a business is stressful. So maybe assume that you need some time away from each other. Maybe assume that you're the problem, right? That you're like too burned out or whatever, because you don't want to just throw something away if it has potential to work. So I think the way to handle that is to first, again, just sort of check in with yourself and see if there's something that you need to adjust and change and move. And I think it's absolutely essential for you to find a coach or a therapist or something that will help you have the difficult conversations you need to have and restore empathy into the relationship and restore the relationship into the relationship and see why you started it to begin with. It's helpful to like talk with yourself about and talk with the other person about, why did you start this business to begin with? And is that still accurate? That the two of you were going to be a good partnership? Like, why did you pick each other? And find ways to remind yourself why this is a good partnership, and then talk really concretely about what's not working. And if you can do that, and that you continue down the path, you may both make the decision that it's time to part ways, but certainly you'll get a lot more data and not just flashpoints of your own irritation or their irritation. And then you'll be able to make an informed decision.
Yeah. And so Maya asked a great question about this topic as well. So should the preparation for the potential dissolution of your partnership be written into that initial agreement?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. There's no reason not to talk about that in early days, because it does happen.
Yeah. So I do want to switch gears a little bit and just ask about some of the relationships that might not necessarily always be a founder or co-founder. So if you're at a large corporation, or even you are an entrepreneur, but you're maybe building relationships with other partners and you don't see yourself having a co-founder, how can you bring that co-founder mindset into these other types of relationships?
I think it's the same principles, slightly adjusted. So I actually encourage my co-founders to be like, let's do a co-founder prenup, and actually, and again, the co-founder prenup can be 3 years in, like, oh, we never talked about this. Let's do it. Now, if you go to a business partner or someone you're trying to engage with, or even an important client and be like, let's do a co-founder prenup. That's like weird. That's like super weird.
Yeah.
But if you lay out sort of say, I thought we could talk about the way we're picturing this relationship and the way we think about conflict together and our kind of vision for ideals. And also, what are my pet peeves and what are your pet peeves? That's like very helpful no matter what.
Yeah.
It starts with, as I said initially, it starts with you. And so how do you know what makes you tick and what you're looking for and not looking for in a partner? This has come up to me recently because one of my founders, he is learning better how to hire. And what he has finally come to realize is that he does not like domineering males who come in and tell him what to do and make him feel stupid. I wonder why he doesn't like that. But there are some people like that because he hires these like 20 years experienced people and then they come in and make him feel stupid. So he finally got that was like triggering him from his past. And that he needed to find people who were experienced and were also open to learn. That took him a self-awareness journey. And those were not co-founders, but they were key business partners. And so that was important to figure out and then embed into the hiring process. Clear goals are never a bad idea, right? Clear goals will always help you, clear roles and goals always help you figure out what should I be doing, what should that person be doing. And then when you notice that person is not doing it, you're like, was that not clear? And if that was not clear, go clarify. But if that was clear, interesting. Now we can have a conversation. When things are not clear, it's muddy and you're like, I don't think they're doing their job, but I don't really know. Yeah, because you didn't really clarify what their job actually is. And this notion of informal time and building the relationship, again, is good for everybody because if you're just sort of doing business and having roles and dealing with conflict, you're only dealing with the person formally, and then you can't build the rapport that you need to. So when the going gets tough, you need to reach them at like midnight, they're going to answer your call. And that's what's so essential about having what I call date night.
Absolutely. And it sounds like so much of the principles and these ideas could be applied even if you're working on a very specific project that has new folks coming together. Like it's a principle that you could embody in a lot of your work.
Yes, 100%. That's really well said.
So jumping around a little bit, but I think you've sparked more questions, which is great. So for founder agreements, self-drafted, drafted by an attorney, some hybrid, like what's the best way to do that?
The expression says, a lawyer who represents herself has a fool for a client. And I would just say, if you're not lawyers, that goes double for you. This is definitely, if you're brand new, if this is your first or second go around and you've never done a founder's agreement before, it's worth it to pay for a good professional who both drafts the agreement for you so it makes sense legally, but also can advise you. Because I don't know what happens if it's like you think about 3 things, but you don't think about the 20 things that could happen. And also, what happens if my co-founder dies? Or what happens if they want to buy me out? I don't know what happens. The lawyers will, because they've seen it before. So that kind of thing is worth hiring the experience.
And now for anyone who might be listening to this with their co-founder and they're maybe a couple of years in and they haven't done any agreement, is it too late or can they go out and do that now?
They should go out and do that now.
Great.
Yeah. I thought you were about to say, for anyone listening, this is not legal advice.
This is not official legal advice, but
if you don't have any agreements, honestly, just really think about it. Like, what if that person goes through a divorce and their spouse comes after your company kind of for half of the ownership of the company? Like, I know that might not happen. It probably won't happen, but it might happen. And what are you going to do? What happens if your co-founder says, all of a sudden, I want to buy you out, right? Like, these things that you don't anticipate are so important to have someone help you really think through in advance. Here's what could happen. What are you going to do about it?
Right. Now, if you're a married couple that has started your business together, also having that agreement in place, is that a resounding yes?
That's a resounding yes.
Great.
I'm thinking a lot of history. Yes.
So a great question came in, and I think this ties back to when we were talking about kind of being that being surrounded by yes people, but what if you in fact are the yes person? So you've brought in co-founders or key hires that have expertise areas that you're not familiar with. How can you be a good partner without maybe knowing all that they know and asking the right questions of those people?
Yeah, I think that I'll just say that literally yesterday, I said to a very experienced founder who was thinking about starting a new business with somebody else. And I said, I'm sure you've already thought about this. And I know this is obvious, but of course you don't want to jump into business with this person before you like do some testing, right? Yeah. He goes, oh, thank you so much for telling me that. I'm like, really? You didn't know that? Right? I mean, like, how did you not know that? So I would just say to you that often what you think is like obvious or a stupid question is actually very useful for the other person. Yep. And you want to create why are you in the co-founder relationship if you don't have the relationship where you can ask stupid questions or not push back, which is violent and isn't necessary, but still explore together, discuss, bring up, have a different point of view, disagree. That is all possible. And, I think it's important, even if you don't know, I think it's important to have the language to say, I don't know what I'm feeling, but it doesn't feel right to me. Can we explore some more? Or even I know that you've been doing this for 20 years. I know you're super experienced. If you could just help me understand why we're doing this thing this way. That is sort of a very diplomatic way. And also it's a way which can be very, someone else can hear you if you bring that up in a way which doesn't then challenge their experience. Right. But I would encourage you to build relationships where you can be direct with people. Now, you can also be diplomatic and should be diplomatic so they can hear you. But diplomatic and direct is your role as a co-founder. Otherwise, you're not being responsible. Otherwise, what's happening is you're just saying yes. You're like, doesn't sound right to me, but I'm sure they know what they're doing. So many businesses have died because somebody didn't say, wait, why are we doing this? Right. So I want to encourage you not to let that happen to your business.
Yeah. I just want to point out for everybody on that you did something really great, Alisa. You tone shifted so beautifully in the way you brought up those different ways to frame your question asking. And I think tone and approach can be very influential in the way you communicate with your teams.
Yes.
Many more questions here. So this one might be hard to answer, but how much equity is enough for somebody to be a co-founder? Like, is there an amount that is the baseline?
No, it totally depends across the board. And if you don't know the answer to that question, that's a great signal that you should go talk to a professional. Like I'm picturing a lawyer, maybe an accountant, maybe a consultant, but probably a lawyer to help you get some baseline questions answered. By the way, I say that with love and respect. Like, you don't know that because you've never done this before. If you spend an hour with an attorney and go through a whole bunch of questions about equity and about the co-founder agreement, you're going to get a lot smarter. And then you're going to be able to know in your mind's eye what feels right.
Yeah. It's kind of like when you go to the mechanic, you want to know enough about your car to ask the right questions and not get played for a fool. And it's the same thing. Knowledge is incredible power in negotiations like this.
Totally.
Yeah. So just to double back to the idea of finding that co-founder for your business.
Yeah.
I'm sure, you've recommended spending time getting to know each other, but are there red flags that you have noticed along the way that people often ignore, whether that's things people tend to say when they're not going to be the right match or are in it for the wrong reasons? Like, what should everybody be keeping their eyes peeled for?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing to keep your eyes peeled on is somebody who doesn't say who doesn't do what they say they will do. Right. Like that's to me a baseline. Like by the way, if you can be in a partnership with somebody that you can't count on, God bless. I can't. Right. So I think that's a big red flag. I think, the sense of that person, when you start feeling resentful early days, like, oh, they're not working hard enough, or they're, that's really super important. The co-founders that I have talked to, especially in my clients, and especially on my podcast, I would say, how did you build trust with your co-founder? And 201, they all said, well, I just saw how hard they were working. And then I knew I had to step up to make sure I was working hard enough. That is a great signal that you can trust this person who's going to be in it with you. That's so important. I think also if you continue to make these assumptions, like, of course I'm just totally making this up. Of course, we're going to build a diverse workforce. That's really important. And the other person might say, yeah. And then doesn't act in any way consistent with that. Look, it's not for me to say whether or not you should build a diverse workforce, but you definitely have disagreeing, right? Because you're not doing the same thing. And you could make that true for, we're building a business that focuses as a starting point just on this arena. Okay, but that person's going off and finding clients or customers in a different arena. Okay, but we just said we're going to do this. Right. So those are some markers that you really want to just dig into the relationship, and it might not be the right person for you.
Yeah. Well, Jennifer had a great question that followed something you were saying here. So is there a world in which you can try out, have a test period with somebody that might be a co-founder? Like, do you get to kind of take the model off the lot? Like, what's the...
I know. Yeah, the answer is sort of yes and sort of no. Okay, so I'm going to give you, it's a great question. I'm going to give you a few examples. So I mentioned Paul English, who I spoke to on my podcast, From Startup to Grown Up. And I told him about the co-founder Prenup, and he's like, that's amazing. And also he told me that he was in Boston with Steve Hafner at the time. They met for a 1 hour, as he said, liquid lunch. And they shook hands over this business they were going to run called Kayak. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. 1 hour? I'm like preaching the co-founder Prenup. What's wrong with you? And he said, no, you're right. You're right, Alisa. We had a long engagement. What we did was we worked on our own without formalizing our agreement. So by the time, 10 months later, we sort of were really in it. We had the business all worked out. We already had gotten to know each other really well. So that's one example. Another example is this wonderful company called NutriSense. Again, I interviewed the co-founder on my podcast, From Startup to Grown Up, and they, pretty much he decided in like a week to join his co-founder, Alex. They were building this, they're building this continuous glucose monitor and a whole bunch of tools around it. And they didn't even have a co-founder agreement at all. And they worked together for 3 months before Dan finally said, we should do a co-founder agreement and Dan quit his job. But Dan said, whatever, I knew I could always get another job, or frankly, always go back to that company. And Alex Cyril, his co-founder and CEO, was a 3-time founder and wasn't going to do anything but startups in his whole life. Yeah. So there's a try before you buy for entrepreneurship, because most entrepreneurs are not in corporate jobs or don't want to be. So it's easy for them to be like, whatever, we'll just try it and see if it goes. Mm-hmm. So I encourage the trying and seeing how it goes, if it's a try before you buy or some sort of like, we haven't kind of formalized everything yet. Right. Because that helps you it's the best way to get to know someone.
Mm-hmm. So I guess a follow-up question on that is, how important is sort of the references, or really embedding yourself in learning about who did they work for before? What did people who worked for them like about their work style? Like, is there benefit to that process?
Yeah, I think there's benefit to that mutually, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, certainly experienced founders, they have a whole group of people who kind of follow them along. And so if this person doesn't have a group of people who's following them along, the question is, I wonder why not? And so I think that there's a lot of benefit to that, but there's no substitute for getting in there and working together and talking together and getting to know each other from that point of view.
Great. Well, this has been an incredible conversation, and I am just so grateful for your time, Melissa. I know the community is. You're getting a lot of love in the chat today.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you.
So again, grateful for your expertise and that you've shared it with our community here and become a part of our community. I have a